This will be the thesis presentation for Robin King. For those of you who may be new to the process, our thesis begins with a pre-thesis during the fall semester, and I worked with Robin during that time to explore the whole topic of intentional community, and you'll see her proposal for an intentional community for River West in Milwaukee. There are two members of the committee, my colleagues, quite knowledgeable and accomplished, Jim Shields and Jim Wasley. They've been a tremendous help, especially during the design semester. We're going to be joined by DuFour, who is a former fellow for the UW-M Department of Architecture. He's now teaching at Cornell. Great to see you, Tao. Looking forward to hearing your comments. And we have Joshua Stein, who teaches at Woodbury University. And I just Googled you, Josh, just to see what you've been up to. And you're the founder of Radical Craft and the co-director of the Data Clay Network. Probably both worth really checking out, I think. We're also joined by Dan Gillen from SOM. You're an associate and studio head. So thank you for joining us. And then we have Sarah Aziz, who's currently a fellow at Texas Tech University, and she's going to be joining us in the fall as a UW-M Department of Architecture fellow next year. So we're really excited to have that. Welcome, Sarah. And last but not least is Mark Keane. He's another accomplished colleague at UW-M. He has been recently teaching a studio focusing on currently on, I guess you're wrapping it up on the solar decathlon, and your studio is a finalist for the Department of Energy competition. So I think we're really excited about this to see, and you'll be able to add some good input for Robin's proposal here. So with that, I'm going to mute myself, and Robin, I'm going to let you take it away.
All right, can everyone hear me? Awesome. All right, I'll share my screen. Alrighty, so I'm Robin King, and my thesis project focuses on designing an intentional community in the River West neighborhood of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So I was drawn to this framework of intentional communities because it's largely how I grew up. My father was in the Navy, so I lived mostly in military base housing, which are intentional communities on a very large scale. This picture is of the naval base in Naples, Italy, where I lived for 3 years. And these communities typically include apartments and houses for naval personnel and their families, parks and playground areas, schools, chapels, stores, even a bowling alley and movie theaters. And there were organized activities for kids and families all the time. But then when I started high school, my dad was stationed at the Pentagon, so we moved to Washington, D.C. and lived in a normal suburban neighborhood. And although our neighbors were friendly and there was the occasional cookout, it lacked the social cohesion I was accustomed to. So since then, I have been passionate about learning what makes a community truly thrive. And with intentional communities, it's their ability to embody the triple bottom line, or people, profit, planet. Intentional communities are typically formed by a group of people who share ideals or views, and community bond is a driving factor. There is large value placed on planned social events, community meals, and chance social encounters with neighbors. Intentional communities are structured as condominiums or cooperatives, where you have ownership of your dwelling unit, but share the responsibility of the land and common space. They also promote lifestyle affordability with shared meals, shared childcare, car sharing, etc. And many of these developments also have rentable commercial space to benefit the community. These communities are often environmentally conscious and can implement sustainable strategies on a community-wide scale. So I looked at 6 different models of intentional communities and drew out 6 patterns of successful ones. The first one is co-housing, and co-housing is a community of private homes clustered around a common space. The focus is on people, and the nucleus of that is the common house. Intergenerational retirement homes are just that, a retirement community that also houses younger generations. This is growing increasingly common with housing students for a reduced rent in exchange for participation in social activities. The Treehouse, which is pictured, is a community for seniors housing and mentoring state foster kids and their parents. This is all with the purpose of intergenerational fellowship. Co-living is shared housing with shared intentions, and co-working is also very common in these spaces. This is more profit-oriented, and live workspace is essential. Housing cooperatives is a different type of ownership. The cooperative or corporation owns the building, and the residents have shares in the company, and those shares include their dwelling unit. It can be very profit-focused, and rentable commercial space is common. Eco-villages are communities that strive for sustainability and lessen possible negative impacts on the environment. Naturally, they are planet-oriented, and ecological interaction is prevalent. In communes, which are groups of people living together and sharing possessions and responsibilities, they are also planet-centric and focus largely on agriculture. These elements that are present in good intentional communities are successful when blended together in culturally and site-specific ways. So my site is located in the River West neighborhood of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Milwaukee is located on the western shore of Lake Michigan. Milwaukee is the largest city in Wisconsin with approximately 600,000 residents. The River West neighborhood is located on the western shore of the Milwaukee River and has approximately 30,000 residents. This neighborhood has seen significant changes over the past 10 years as the area gentrified. It is now one of the most racially diverse neighborhoods in Milwaukee, but homeownership has decreased significantly. Now over 70% of residents rent, and 31% of residents live below the poverty line. My site is located on North Avenue, adjacent to the Riverview dormitories and the Milwaukee River, and extends west to Humboldt Avenue. I selected the River West neighborhood because it was a location that could support and benefit from an intentional community. Over the past 10 years, this neighborhood has become more transitory and without a heart or center to the community. During this time, many medium to high density housing projects have been built along the river on Commerce Street. And these buildings were built for isolated housing. Most of these buildings have no community space, and the neighborhood has little to offer in that regard as well. Although there was significant increase in housing, there was little new development in commercial aspects like restaurants. And there are few places to gather or have chance social interactions without going across the river. However, this site does have some advantages. It is located directly across the street from a large grocery store, a Pick and Save. It is also located adjacent to the Milwaukee River and the Oakleaf Trail, which has over 160 miles of paved bike path. And the North Avenue Dam is just south of my site, meaning that the part of the river adjacent to my site has a natural ecosystem before it flows through the hard edges of Milwaukee Riverwalk, downtown, and out to Lake Michigan. And to the west of my site is Kilbourne Reservoir Park, which hosts community activities like live music. The topography of my site is very steep. The low point of the river is 583 feet. It hops up to 641 feet for the site entry, and then up to 652 feet for the main garden level, and up to 672 feet to the neighborhood to the west. The site requires development, and now the steep grade makes drainage on the site and channeling water down to the river a high priority. For my community to be successful, I determined 6 critical issues that needed to be addressed. These include addressing the street edge, creating live workspace, a community common house, a variety of housing units, water mitigation strategies, and solar power. This is my site as it is today, with the existing single-family homes to the north, Riverview dorms and the river to the east, North Avenue directly south with the new apartments lining Commerce Street, and to the west is Humboldt Avenue. Both Humboldt and North Avenue are busy streets accommodating roughly 20,000 cars a day. So the first thing to do was to put the streets on a road diet. This would reduce vehicle speed, add a median as a buffer between bike and car lanes, and widen the sidewalk on the north side of North Avenue. This widened sidewalk would create a nice microclimate to be able to accommodate outdoor cafe seating and increase pedestrian traffic. To support this, I'm proposing a mixed-use development to hold the corner. This would create a commercial space on street level and housing above. East of the mixed-use building would be the common house. This serves as an anchor to the intentional community. On the left and right of the common house would be apartments for the residents of the intentional community. The common house and apartments sit on a plinth that houses more commercial space on North Avenue. The building serves as a wall to create some privacy for the intentional community. In the intentional community are rows of north-south oriented gabled roof houses, a greenhouse centered on the north edge of the site, and the north and west edges would have terraced retaining walls to respond to the grade and create a flat community center for gardening. And this also includes a ramp on the northeast corner connecting the neighborhood above and my community down to the Oak Leaf Trail. There is a large retention pond and several other water features to channel water to this pond, and various spaces to live, play, and socialize outdoors. The main vehicle access to the community would be shared with Riverview dorms, so the existing entry would be modified with planting strips and lined with trees to create a boulevard benefiting both communities. The site, including the proposed mixed-use development, is 1.9 acres. Less than half, or 0.8 acres, is taken up with the housing footprints. So 1.1 acres is left as open space. Now, let me show you the plans. So level 1 houses the commercial space for the common house building, and behind that is a parking garage accessed off of the new Riverview Boulevard. This garage is for the apartments and the row houses on the west side of the site that do not have private garages. Along the boulevard are the private garages for the east side row houses. These houses also have flex rooms that can serve as live workspace. And the heart of the community is one level up, and the primary access is through the stairs and elevator portal to the common house. From that portal, you can enter into the common house or continue into the main garden space. The primary entries for the row houses are on this level, as are the entries for the garden level apartments. The apartments are divided by micro portals here and here, and every unit has private access from the exterior. The row houses are multi-story with internal circulation, and all apartment circulation is external, with the upper levels of the apartments accessed off of the stairs and the micro portals. Each portal services 6 units, 2 on each level, and the common house levels are all accessed off of the main portal. All apartment levels are identical with 4 2-bedroom and 4 1-bedroom units. The upper 2 levels of the apartment each share a balcony on the south side, allowing for additional egress and a place for neighborly socialization. There are 36 total dwelling units in the community, 12 1-bed and 12 2-bed apartments, 6 3-bedroom houses, and 6 4-bedroom houses. The 6 homes on the west side of the site are 3-bedroom units and approximately 1,400 square feet. The east side units are approximately 1,700 square feet. These units have private garages and an additional bedroom and half bath and this room could be used as a live-work office space or for additional separation in a multi-generational family household. The second level hosts the main living space with a great room and has a flex space and balcony. This flex space has sliding doors on two sides so that it can be enclosed or open to the room. I have it set up as formal dining in my render. And there is a covered patio space connecting each unit to the green space. The third level houses 2 bedrooms and a bathroom and a master suite. And off of the master suite is a balcony facing the green space. So the 1-bedroom apartment units are approximately 525 square feet and have an open concept living area with an eat-in kitchen. The master suite includes a walk-through closet to the ensuite bathroom. These units either have a view of the green space or to downtown, and 6 of these units are fully accessible from the elevator. The 2-bedroom units are approximately 1,050 square feet and have an L-shaped kitchen dining living area, a master suite, second bathroom and bedroom, and a flex room that could be a home office, den, or additional bedroom. And from the great room, all units either have direct access to the green space or a balcony overlooking it. And this serves to promote a sense of neighborly connection. This is the garden level of the common house. This houses the kitchen and dining hall for community meals. It would also be a flexible space for other community events. This level opens up directly to the green space and has additional dining space out on a patio. Above that is a mezzanine level that looks down to the dining hall below, and it is set up as a casual lounge space with tables on the balcony on the south side with views of downtown. The top level includes 2 guest suites facing downtown and a community room with large balcony facing the central green space. So this section shows the sun coming into the building and the shadow it is casting on the green space on both the summer and winter equinox. Sun and shading will become increasingly more important for a resilient community. In the next 50 years, days over 90 degrees will more than double from the 20 days a year currently to 48. So the balconies on the south side of the building help to shade, as does the trellis over the commercial space, and the building itself helps to shade the patio directly off of the common house. The green space is the heart of the community, and in it you can see many patterns present. The common house is centered on the far side of the site. There is space for intergenerational fellowship with outdoor dining adjacent to the playscape and open field. Solar panels on the roof of the apartments and gabled roofs of the row houses extending out onto the trellises. There's a greenhouse and outdoor gardening space, and you can see water flowing down from the retaining walls on the north and west side and being channeled into the main retention pond. Now, let me show you what it'd be like to live here. This is the new North Avenue, with widened sidewalk to allow retail space to extend out from outdoor seating. And the main portal is accessed off of this near the center of the building. So this is the view of the portal entering the community. You can see part of the biofiltration garden for the stormwater and PV panels on the row house roofs. There are approximately 255 standard size solar panels in this community, assuming the units consume an average of 28.9 kilowatts per hour per day. Per house with 36 units, that's 1,040 kilowatts a day, and a standard PV panel produces 1 kilowatt per hour and approximately 4 hours of direct sunlight a day. This would produce 100% of the electricity in my community. So this is looking back at the portal and common house entry. You can see the shaded outdoor space and grill adjacent to the entry. And the buildings use cross-laminated timber as the structure and are clad in wood Pradema panels to emphasize the CLT. The common house opens up to the shaded outdoor patio and field and playscape for games. You can see various different public gathering spaces as activity nodes dispersed around the site, and the trellis structures over the row houses. The trellises house PV panels and serve to create semi-private spaces as a transition from the common green space to the private units. Water is an integral part of this community. Milwaukee uses a dual sewer system where wastewater and rainwater go into the same pipes. This is a problem during heavy storms, causing the sewer to back up and overflow into the streets. Milwaukee is taking steps to try to reduce the amount of stormwater going into the sewer with programs like disconnecting downspouts, having the rainwater flow into your yard and sewer. But impervious pavement runoff on urban and suburban streets and rooftops is one of the most severe water quality impacts in the US. To address this, my design harvests the rainwater on my site and the surrounding neighborhood to the north and west, and then filters it through biofiltration gardens before it flows back down to the Milwaukee River, thus cleaning the water and keeping it out of the sewer. The retention pond and filtration gardens create nearly 6,000 cubic feet of rainwater storage. This is approximately 10% larger than the site's current rainwater storage needs, so this will allow for the system to accommodate the continual increase in precipitation. And this water would also be used as irrigation for the gardens in the community. This site includes a greenhouse, an outdoor gardening space for food production. Outdoors, there's in-ground planting space and raised planter beds that are ADA accessible, providing approximately 2,000 square feet of growing space. And the greenhouse provides an additional 1,000 square feet of planting. This would produce about 3,500 pounds of food per year. That's not enough to feed the whole community year round, but it is more than adequate for community dinners a couple times a week. So my goal was to create an intentional community utilizing these patterns to support the triple bottom line ideals: a common house for community gatherings and intergenerational fellowship, live workspaces and commercial spaces, solar power and agriculture, in my site plan, I was able to incorporate all 6 patterns of successful intentional communities and address the site-specific issues, including water mitigation and efficient street design. Additionally, community green space and a variety of housing units completed my vision of a resilient intentional community. Thank you.
Okay. Robin, thank you so much for that excellent exposition. What I'd like to do is I'd like to start off with my fellow committee members to see if they have any questions or comments. They've been intimately involved with the project. I just want to see what their take is, and then we'll move on to our guests.
I'll unmute and say, you're hired, and when can I move in? I'm blown away, Robin, and you've met really good requirements for 723 as well as your thesis project, so congratulations. I'm going to shut up and wait for the outside jurors to weigh in, but I love the thoroughness of this and the real humanity behind the vision of it, so thank you.
Thank you.
Robin, it's been a pleasure to work with you this semester. And I have to say that, you know, in my practice, I have a lot of association with the development community. And it's always been surprising to me the reluctance that they've had historically to actually to try to provide for the needs of a whole community. And just interested, like all the surrounding apartment buildings that have been built recently, just interested in just apartments alone and frequently shying away from the sort of mixed-use developments and intentional communities that could probably bring them much greater profits and be much better for the neighborhood and the community. But I've seen things starting to change, and I think it would be really exciting to see large parts of the development community be able to see a project like this one and be able to actually produce parts of neighborhoods like this in the near future.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen, for your comments. And now let's move on to some of our guest critics. I'll play MC here, but Tao, Really looking forward to hearing your thoughts about this.
Yeah, so I would sort of reiterate, I think it's an extremely thoughtful, very accomplished and kind of rigorous project, so congratulations. Maybe I'll start with a little bit of a more general question, and maybe I'll sort of frame it in two ways. Would you see this as being kind of prototypical, or I could probably ask it differently, which is, how would you imagine the relationship between the intentional community as you've described it and the kind of wider urban conditions? So, for example, one can see the kind of the water storage and filtration system, for example, as somehow or other serving a larger portion of the city in somewhat of a kind of measurable sense. We can see that it doesn't function purely for the intentional community as you've described it and designed it. So how might the wider context, the wider kind of social civic context engage with the community as you've described it and designed it?
Like, how would the community work with this?
Yeah, so maybe so, for example, at the ground level, it seems the relationship that your intentional community has to the kind of wider civic realm, the wider public realm, is primarily commercial. Right?
Yeah.
Is there another means of engagement? What are the kind of levels of porosity that your community has with the wider urban context?
Sure. So I think we kind of meant for this project to be a catalyst for more community development with the street edge and connecting the neighborhood above down to the Oak Leaf Trail and down to this community below, addressing the topography. But intentional communities like the green space is typically more private to the community. Like, the idea was not for this to be a public park or something like that. So there's some perforation with the portals to connect the community to show that there is something neat back here. But this is more of an idea of further community development and how this can be a great prototype for a more sustainable community.
Okay. So I guess that's the in its kind of prototypical function, one might say this becomes exemplary of a kind of an approach to urban development more broadly. So if we say there is sort of one intentional community that it's oriented and structured in one particular way, and it's a successful prototype, and it becomes duplicated because it functions in an exemplary way, and you have 2 and 3, and it develops to form a much larger kind of urban structure. One then begins to wonder in what way the intentional communities, in their separateness, engage with and interact with each other to form a larger civic realm, you might say.
Yeah.
Maybe just a thought, in that.
Yeah, no, that's my vision of the world.
Yeah, Tao, you're asking a really important question, and one that I think is still a little unresolved. The question of the portals from North Avenue and how do they control access. So as Robin is saying, this is really meant for the community, but what we haven't yet programmed into or thought about is how there might be special events and how the public might come into this. Could there be farmers markets or craft market? Those are things that that I think the level of richness that you're sort of, I think, starting to talk about are things that would inevitably come up, through the process of working with a community, which of course is the missing ingredient for this. And this is really Robin kind of operating as best as she could without the benefit of involving 30 or 40 families in this process who would bring it up. But it's a great comment. Let's move on to Josh. Would you like to weigh in here?
Sure. Hi, Robin. I actually, oddly enough, I know that site decently well. Used to go for a lot of walks right down by the river there. I mean, the project does so many things well. You know, if you imagine everything that you've tackled here, it's kind of amazing. So in some ways, it makes it hard to critique, I would say, unless, let's say for me, unless we zoom outside the project for a second. And that's maybe also because it does so many things well. I also get nervous that maybe some of the struggle hasn't been explained or maybe even indulged. Like, and I'll give an example, right? So the explanation of the intentional communities feels like I can't tell what it really offers the project at the moment. Like if I had just come to this and I missed the first 10 minutes of the presentation about the intentional communities, you've explained everything, all of the moves in terms of creating different areas for different populations, in terms of addressing ecological issues, but I almost wouldn't need that part of the presentation for me to like the project or not like the project, right? Like, so I'm confused in terms of what that research offered. And I wonder if there also would have been a way to make that research phase a little bit more specific to Milwaukee and the type of development that is happening in that area at this moment. Meaning, if you had stepped away and you were not involved in this, what would the development look like? I mean, it's that parcel of land is sitting there, and in some ways it feels kind of fallow. It looks like, I think there are some single-family residential houses there right now that would maybe be demoed for this, but just a few. Is that correct?
Yeah, 2.
And it doesn't. It's open space, but it certainly doesn't feel like a public park at the moment, right? Like, but I think I can't tell if something like this would kind of occur naturally over time anyway, like given the kind of momentum of the real estate market. And I think maybe that's where I would love to see like what you're bringing to this with the intentional community in terms of how that sets this parcel apart from what might be done otherwise. And then I think like Hal's question about the civic nature of the project also feels like maybe an outgrowth of that. The one example that you gave of the military base or that community that you lived in, like I have a huge, for me, it's a huge disconnect as to how that as an example or a model would make sense on this site in Milwaukee. Right? To me, I don't get it. For you might get it, right? Like, but that part of the research, I think, is actually what would be exciting for me, is to say like, okay, these are the aspects of intentional design that might fundamentally change the way we think about the civic nature of the city. Because it does seem like you talk about that a little bit right at the beginning of your presentation, but then it does get a little bit lost when we get into just the specifics of all of the good moves that I think you've done, but that don't necessarily answer the question in a larger way about what this means for the city.
Yeah, and I think more what my studies in intentional communities were in the different models. Many of them, like eco-villages and communes, are typically more rural, and then co-living and housing cooperatives are more like urban addresses. But then in typical development, this green space just wouldn't happen. It's usually about highest density in the area to be more profitable. So I was trying to merge the different patterns in these like rural and urban areas to promote a strong urban community.
And I would just add that when Robin added that bit about her own experience growing up in an intentional community, that came about rather late. I asked her, and usually I would ask students this a little bit earlier in the process, but I said, well, why did you want to do this, this kind of project? And she told me about her experience, and I said, you know what, put that in. Because I think you know something about living on an intentional in an intentional community that maybe a lot of other folks haven't experienced. I'd also say that one of the conversations that we've had, and this relates to Jim Shields' earlier comment, is that to think about presenting this as a developer, not as an architect, but to come into a city and to propose a different vision. This Milwaukee isn't Davis, California. It might happen a little bit more naturally there. Milwaukee needs a push, but I think Jim Shields is correct that there is some movement, and we need some leadership. And you know, architects are really good at coming up with these visions. The missing ingredient probably in a lot of our educations is that we don't understand the development process. And so I think this was really intended as the audience might well be the city, the community, and to present this. Co-housing or these sorts of things the market hasn't really taken off yet, but this is certainly an alternative vision. Why don't we move on to Dan, would you like to weigh in?
Happy to. Quick question. Where did you live in DC?
Fairfax, Virginia.
Yeah, cool. I went to Oakton High School. So.
Oh, Woodson.
Oh, really? Nice. Yeah. I lived there for 21 years in Northern Virginia, so I'm very familiar with that area. I thought that, I don't know if you've taken a class in presenting or if if you've practiced that a lot, but it was every time I hear a presentation, I like to learn something. I feel like it's basically you teaching me about your project. Mm-hmm. And you did that exceptionally well. It was concise, it wasn't wordy, you hit the highlights. And I always say when I present, see what you say and say what you see. So you only spoke about what was on the screen, and that keeps the viewer engaged. And you supplemented everything, sort of your architectural moves with data points, which I think is also pretty helpful. So there was sort of no questioning why it would be valid. And I particularly liked that you mentioned that you had lived in one of these communities. I think that it lended credence to your vision and also allowed me to trust that you knew what you were talking about more at the beginning, So I thought all of that was seamless. I do agree with Joshua, though, that the resistance here is not necessarily evident. What challenges that you can, thwarted in order to get here. I think I would have liked to have heard a little bit about the pain, as not just all sort of the positives. But that's just me. I mean, typically developers and clients don't like to hear about the pain points, but I think that what is lacking, again, to parrot what others have said, is something like this. We're all believers. It seems cool. I'd live there, sure. But why don't we see more communities like this? I think that's a huge question that's sort of under addressed in this presentation. I would have liked to have seen more rigorous research into the other communities as well around. And, I can tell you why. It's just not as economically profitable as the others, right? So how, as an architect, can you, that's sort of equal to, or if not, take precedent over a lot of the other reasons why we don't see more of this. And so it's sort of, in academia, I know it's not super important, but the only reason I touch on that is because it's been so developed and so articulated in so many different ways that to me seems, like Brian was saying, the developer aspect of it is critical. What's the value add for them is basically unfortunately, that and salesmanship is basically what architecture in you know, unless you're my old employer and an artist, it doesn't. You have to address those things. So all that being said, I think it was fantastic presentation. You ended on a sort of overall rendering, which is always great. I also say, you know, start strong, end strong, which you did. The only thing I would say architecturally is, you know, because it is academia, I know this is an ambitious project in its sort of conception, but I found myself needing a little bit more ambition, maybe architecturally, and maybe that's my sort of, you know, past formal nature or formal history of architecture. But, you know, I think you could push it. This is all very easily digestible. You've made it so, but, you know, I think some more romance in the actual architectural expression could help to enhance the romance of the idea of the community.
Yeah.
I think that's a great comment. One of the observations that I have from working with thesis students over the years is that when they attempt to take on a complicated project like this, big site, lots of different components, and they're trying to think like civil engineers and architects and landscape architects. It's not stuff that we really teach in class. It's not to say that students can't absorb some of that, but in the heat of the battle of a thesis project, it is really difficult to kind of pick and choose. Robin was really good at picking and choosing her battles, so that she could present, so she could, you know, land this plane very safely and convincingly. But it's a really good point, and she knows sort of where those particular parts are. I'd also just add that, you know, in presenting something like this, she did so much prep work and trial and error. A lot of that is, you know, left on the cutting room floor.
Sure.
I'm sure everybody can appreciate how that goes.
Yeah, self-curation is really important, and I think you've done a great job. And, you know, we don't need to see necessarily all the messiness, but, you know, it does sometimes help to show a little bit of the rigor involved, you know, to show us that you sort of battled through these things. I will say the last comment is my old office did a project in LA. It's called Garden House that sort of comes to mind here. It's a community. It's sort of a block project in LA, and it's intended to create a community. And it's not exactly like this, but, you know, it starts to sort of blur those barriers between the sort of regularized housing in LA and the single family home and all of this kind of ownership and community. So something to take a look at.
Great, we'll check that out.
Great, I'll have to look that up.
And then Sarah, Aziz, we're really curious about your take on this.
Well, thank you so much, Robin, for such a thorough and rigorous presentation. And I want to start by addressing a few of the other points that were mentioned. So in relation to the messiness, I think that is yet to come. I don't think, I'll get to that momentarily, but I'm excited to see how that transpires, because I think one thing that's lacking in the project is the role of narrative and how that plays out in urban planning, right? And one thing that I found fascinating was this very empirical way that you see the world, right? You're almost like a human algorithm, which is something to celebrate and something that can become really instrumental in your own practice. While you were speaking, the project reminded me of a number of other projects. So Ute Van Lieshout's Slave City, which is incredibly dystopian, but plays on this idea of looking at humans in this very data-driven way and then compiling that information into a set of parameters that can completely control the human condition. I was also thinking about Pattern City, which I imagine you looked at in creating this. And then also there's a really great essay on the We Company. So We Work, We Space, by, I've got it here, Sharelle Liu. And in that, she conducted a number of studies that looked at how WeSpace's algorithm began to assign space to people and how people really perceive communal spaces. And what they found was communal spaces were usually pushed to the periphery. And the idea was that these spaces became instrumentalized for performance by maximizing voyeurism and mass exhibitionism, right? So the idea was all about watching and being watched. And I wonder if you can take that same sensibility and then take a step back and relinquish authorship of a work and allow multiple narratives to play out in the scheme. Because I think what you've created is very utopian, and anytime something is utopian, there's a very fine line before it falls into dystopia. So I'm curious as to the kinds of negotiations and the kinds of misuse that would occur by different community members, by people who are a part of different cultures, right? What happens when they converge? What happens in those messy overlaps? And how would you begin to, how would that begin to affect the scheme and the way that you design? So it's either you see yourself as like an intermediary, it's like you lay out the game, you lay out the parameters, and then you allow narratives to play out on them, or you use that narrative as a generator of design to then make small changes continuously.
Good idea. Much deeper dive into the thought process.
Yeah, in some ways, the big question for what we do, I think, is setting up the bones of the project and allowing the messiness and the vitality to sort of show up as a result of the people that actually get involved in the process and actually live there. So things look pretty pretty pristine in here, and that's part of the selling, I think, of the vision. But whether or not the pond, you know, does that work? Does that swan always stay there, you know, sort of perfect? Do you get geese that start attacking people? There's all that. But I think that, you know, Sarah's point is a good one. This also, it's just that it's a reflection of how we approach teaching in school, which is, it's hard to engage communities and finish a project on time. But that's all very good. I wanted to actually move on to our last critic, Mark Keane, if you're still there.
I'm here. Hi, Robin.
Hi.
Hi.
Wonderful job. Very thorough, very complete. To be commended for such an extraordinary composition of ideas in our fair city here. When I look at this, I love this last image because for me it brings up some all your strengths there, having this sort of geode. And you walk inside the framework and you got all this wonderful sort of stage set for your users there. And when I look at this image, though, it didn't dawn on me until I saw this view, is that maybe because you took advantage of leaking this out from Humboldt all the way down to the lake, maybe there's a north-south access, which would have moved from your greenhouse across North Boulevard to the underlies green space by Pick and Save to kind of invite the neighborhood to go through. Because right now they kind of slip in, if you know where you're going, sort of a discrete entrance, as opposed to being sort of more of a public awareness. And then that got me thinking that when I saw your section, that this is really designed for a more moderate climate where you're protecting people you mentioned by the heat gain in future years. You want to create shade and privacy, and so the summer azimuth is great because you're going to have solar protection by your 3-story building. I think if you look at like what COVID's doing for people now, as soon as there's a 62-degree day, everybody's out walking in the sunlight. You just really need that in Milwaukee from November through May, it seems like, that we have to have solar gain, even though it might be beastly hot in the summer. So then I was thinking sort of planning-wise, maybe your open space where the 5 umbrellas are now could be flipped with the growing space, which also led me to thinking maybe the growing space is too formulaic to say, here's the indoor, here's the outdoor, where you probably grow the same amount of food if you just grew it vertically. Just put everything in a green box and make it 3 stories tall and just have a rotating plant grid. And that way you can sort of just green the whole interior there with your waterway. Which then, you know, Sarah had a great point about the authorship here, which is another thing kind of dawned on me, is that You are so driven to solve everything here completely that I wonder if you eliminate creativity by the people themselves. Like where's our neutral? In your great portrait here, maybe in a sense, sometimes the artist has to be stopped to just invite people to explore on their own and make on their own. So it's lovely that you have designed at this point, but maybe maybe the benefit here is when the developer comes, they'll have to strip away things, and it might even make it a stronger scheme to neutralize some parts.
Yeah, interesting.
Does that make sense at all?
Thoughts? Yeah.
And then a couple things I'd say just about, I love how you hit the nexus, you know, energy, food, and water. You got them all covered to the highest degree I've seen in years here at Syrup. It's super terrific there. I wonder though if the next step, it wouldn't take very far at all, is again, like the gentleman who mentioned, let's talk about the architecture a little bit. I think take one unit and do a great wall section for it. And you sort of be done in terms of not just supplying energy, but not using as much energy here as well. Because you could stake your flag there too with a great wall section on one of the units and say that's sort of prototypical. That'd be pretty simple to do too. And one little detail, I don't want to keep picking because it's just a wonderful scheme, but it's drawn so well, it brings some things to light. Is if you look at the first floor of all those units, you're not going to get people who want to live in sort of an aquarium there where they have floor-to-ceiling glazing with the general public right outside, because there's no social sort of pathological separation between the outside person and the people inside their private space. There's no level change. So it makes it a little bit difficult on those lower units across your whole space. It sort of seems like it opens them up to the garden, but it kind of breaks down their defense mechanism psychologically to see somebody outside their unit at the same head height. That's why most residential spaces are above the street level outside. And that's just kind of a detail by building out the base in your architecture kind of solve that. So I really don't want to say there's stuff wrong with this. But it's just a matter of when you render this well, it just opens up to how we can sort of tweak it and fine tune it now. But it's a great, great project. Congratulations.
Yeah. Oh, I was just going to say, I'm sorry, Robin, I'm about to step. Oh, I was just going to say, Mark, that's a great comment. We've been looking at Loophole Jablonski's Madison co-housing, where you can really see where he struggled with this question of common space and interior space. Sorry for the echo. But it's a great example of what you're talking about. Really subtle work. Are there other comments?
One of the things that we did discuss on the committee was trying to bring some additional, let's call them student apartments or micro units that worked in association with the 8 townhouse units. And, you know, I think you have that potential, but only on the lower level of the units on the left. And I don't think any of that potential exists up here in this green. And I think it's still a good idea to be introducing some teeny little lower income like student apartments here, where those people might have had just a bedroom and a bathroom and actually could use the kitchen and living space, either the unit they're in or of the commons across the way. And I think it could address some of the criticism or ideas that Tao had brought forward and some of the other critics as well. That is, I think the worst case here would be that this becomes a gated community where, you know, the developer and the owners here, they said, oh, we are shutting the neighborhood out and we're going to build gates with security only access. Having little micro units, like 8 of them up here, and the comings and goings of college students and their friends really, you know, could bring actual lifeblood of the community into this place somehow. And I think the other idea that maybe there's a farmer's market or a craft market in here, or at least on a Saturday, the community is somehow invited in. I think you know, Aziz also described the potential of a utopian project to veer into a dystopian world. And I think to the extent it would become truly gated, that is a really dystopian vision. And so trying to find ways to subvert that or prevent it would be a nice touch on this project.
To that point, I mean, one thing that's also interesting is the fact that you have potential to create all kinds of alternative economic models, right? So the farmers market, it immediately makes me think of a very particular demographic who are on the higher end of the socioeconomic spectrum, right? And you mentioned that I think it was 31% of the River West community is below the poverty line. So I think this fine line between utopia and dystopia can be controlled or can be, rethought by you using all of these systems, from the water irrigation systems to the these like small allotment gardens, to rethink the economic structure of this place. So it's not about, I think one thing that I find incredibly dystopian is regurgitating things that are already out there and just like collaging them into one place. So using ideas that are associated with like the ideal like suburban or like urban life, right? So it was really interesting when you were speaking about the military city and how, and this goes back to you banish out, but as humans, the perfect like conurbation is comprised of a cinema, a bowling alley, a farmer's market, a this and that. So then how can you use those as tools and weaponize them and, actually provide opportunity for people who are disenfranchised in the community, and you use them as a way to like level the playing field?
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, these are all really great comments. I think that one way to mitigate the problem of the public and how they interact would be to maybe rethink the common zone, the sort of gigantic portal. If that was, community space, I think was already mentioned that there's an overhead to having a community like this and space that's not really rentable. But let's say that was a commercial entity, a restaurant that people could work in, come back out into it. That might help to really bring the community into the space rather than saying, well, this is just for members only. Maybe you take the greenhouse and you start to think about that as having a dual function. Yes, it grows plants, but it becomes sort of the inner sanctum for the community itself so that they can enjoy that for themselves. So those are different ways of thinking about it. From people who I've known over the years who've lived in utopian communities, it's not the problem. The dystopian quality of it actually comes from more of the sort of authority of having to work and live in a community and to agree with people on about shared rules. And it's not just from the military, but Israeli kibbutzim are very, very tough places to live because there's a high degree of control over your life. And if you talk to people who are members of co-housing communities, there's a lot of process. And I think that would be my only misgiving about living in a place like this, is that I'm not sure I could take the meetings. But
I do think that that's where we sell short the vision that I don't think this is a developer at all. I think this is a group of people who are choosing to live this way. And to me, the only problem with it, Robin, is that you've rendered it still, it feels like a country club. It's so lush. But if you think about, 15 families or 30 families in River West in their current situations, how could they bond together and share resources to live communally? I think that, the idea of taking the common kitchen where you're going to spend a lot of your social time and turning that into something that's outward facing, to me feels like we're missing the point of the communal aspect of this. So I just want to defend that vision. I think it's hard for us to see it because it's a very rich community. It looks like something we'd find in Boulder and not in Madison even, or in Victoria and not here. It's a very wealthy group of people who are sharing resources. The other thing I would just defend before signing off is that if you had zoomed out a little bit more to go back to your urban design moves, the thing that you've really solved here that doesn't even show it looks so effortlessly is that this is a really challenging site. And I think this is the best scheme I've seen on it in 20 years. So the topography, the relation to the community, the connection that you just glossed over of the bike trail down from the neighborhood to the river. I think there are answers to a lot of these things. People have felt like it's insular, but you've actually done a lot to stitch it into the community. But I wouldn't sell it out as a communal living space. That I do think it's a really challenging question to say, how do we draw the line between public and private in that situation? But I think the gamble here is that you're saying people are going to live in a very different way than we're familiar with living.
I want to, one thing that has come out that's become more clear since the beginning of the presentation is how much this project wants to fight against a kind of standard developer model. And let's say the formulaic nature of those developer models, certainly in terms of like, what's interesting was that Sarah also made the observation that your brain works in a very algorithmic way. And there's kind of something beautiful about trying to somehow subvert or move around something that's very formulaic with a brain that's very algorithmic. It's like you're almost trying to beat them at their own game. And that is worthy of a real thesis, let's say. You know, like I think, I don't know the answer to that. Like, I don't know how you beat developers at their own game when you're trying to think in those terms. But it does feel like that maybe is a little bit of the struggle that is happening here that I think I was asking to be more evident, right? Like, how do you actually get yourself out of the expectations of the developer model and maybe bring in a little bit more of the vitality and messiness that I think Sarah was hinting at and also that Mark was hinting at. But still to do it through a set of, in a way, almost like strict operations, right?
These are all really great comments. We're a little bit over, and I don't care. But I did want to point out that Dan and Sarah had provided some links in the comments. We really appreciate that. So I just copied all those over into my computer, and so I'll take a look at those. I would definitely do that. Robin? Are there any other comments that people have or questions?
Maybe I'd just like to say one thing, just I'll try to be very brief, I guess. I think to me, as a kind of larger conceptual question, maybe, or maybe not even a question as such, but I think it's sort of important to maintain a certain attitude toward the question of openness. And I think Jim's comment toward the end, so Jim, you suggested that it's not quite the developer model. It's sort of, it organizes itself in another way, perhaps.
It would absolutely not be a developer.
Yeah. But just the principle, but you know, pointing to a larger principle that it's, there's also a certain question of I guess, structures of civic organization, in a way, that they're kind of ethical, political on the one hand, but then they're also, you know, physical, they're also spatial. So something like the manner in which the larger community, so the kind of larger social context of the city, how might someone move through your community? Would you facilitate that kind of open movement? And in a certain way, it might appear kind of very straightforward in a sense, but just that condition where you interact with a wider public already presents possibilities for dialogue, and that dialogue might be conflictual, perhaps. Yeah. So for me, I think you know, extremely thoughtful and accomplished project, but maybe just keep in mind the question of openness openness both in a spatial sense, but also in a kind of ethical, political sense. But again, congratulations on a great thesis.
Does anybody else have anything to add?
Just want to thank everybody for letting me be a part of it. It's been awesome. Here's some video for you all, my co-critiquer.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was really a great project. Really great project. Solid presentation. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Luna says yes as well. So, and thank you, Brian, for including me, and thank you, Mo, as always. I appreciate it. It's really awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Wonderful. Well, I'll just end by saying, Robin, I'm going to miss working with you. This was super fun. When you come back from Alabama, in your parents' house, right? You're going to come back to Milwaukee, and stay in touch, please.
Okay.
I think we need to get in touch with some developers.